thank you so much for coming on. Claudine, why don't you give yourself maybe a little bio? You could probably introduce yourself much better than I could. I've been following you on Instagram for a while, and I love what you're posting on there. But beyond that, I'm probably not too familiar with the ins and outs of who you are and what you're doing. Could you maybe introduce just the audience who don't know who you are? Who are you? What are you about?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. My name is Claudine Gallacher, and I'm an ex-Mormon. I was a convert, actually, to Mormonism,
Hmm.
and I was involved for nearly 27 years.
Wow.
And maybe around 4 or 5 years ago, maybe just four. It seems like a lot has happened in that time period. Um, I had a big shift in my thinking,
Hmm.
and we can, go in and talk about that. But there was a time I thought I might be going crazy,
Hmm.
and that it was very scary, and I felt alone. And I really committed to myself, if I could figure a way to get past this and to figure it out, what was happening in my own brain and my world, um, and find some practical strategies that I would help and serve and do everything that I could to set up a platform for other people so that they
Wow.
wouldn't feel like what I did. And,
Yeah.
I wasn't the first one through it. I relied on others who did that same thing. And
Sure.
so I just wanted to be part of the healing process because
Hmm.
I understood like how big of a shift it could be.
Yeah, it's a huge. I mean, the shift you're talking about, and I know that we're talking about slightly different movements when we're talking about Mormonism, and a lot of people listening to this are kind of maybe evangelical or coming out of kind of more conventional Christian movements. I'm not sure what the appropriate thing. I don't want to, crap all over Mormons by saying they're not conventional, but certainly within the evangelical world, like
Right.
Mormons are
Yeah. Yeah.
cults. They're with the Jehovah's Witnesses
Uh-huh.
and whatever. But so they're different, but really in my interactions with people that are in this process of deconstructing their faith within Mormonism, like the overlap is astounding. I mean,
It is.
it's
It
you could
is.
be talking to two different same people using
Yeah.
slightly different language, but they're talking about the same
Exactly.
processes, same sort of things, and it does seem like, I mean, in some ways the Mormon community is even more kind of exclusive and quite extreme when compared to a lot of other Christian movements. And so that loss of
Right.
community is a whole nother level, it feels. Is that fair to
Yes.
say?
Yes. Yeah. No, Mormons do community extraordinarily well.
Mm,
And, it is maybe, I don't know if you can call it one of the superpowers, right, of Mormonism, because M- Mormonism or Mormon congregations are organized a lot like school districts.
right.
At least I know you're in UK. I don't know exactly how it works over there, but in the United States, you move to a particular city, and once you have a house, a residence in that city, there is a school district in
Yep.
which you reside in. And Mormonism is a lot like that. You can
Mm,
move basically anywhere, for sure, anywhere in the United States, many, many countries in the world. And once you have a residence, right, you are assigned a particular building that you would
yeah.
attend. So you can, you know, move and have people, a community, just instant, ready and waiting.
Right.
There's not church shopping,
Yeah.
in Mormonism in that way. And people will help you move in, move out, bring you meals, right? It's set up, ready to go. And then you're
It's incredible.
instantly brought in, given a job and a task. I think one of the things that's different in Mormonism than at least what I have seen in most Christian
Mm,
churches is, everyone has a job, and that there is, no paid ministry on the local level.
mm.
So someone would be called basically from the congregation to be the leader for a period of time, and then that would swap
Wow.
out, right? But everybody gets different jobs. Everyone's a speaker, everyone's a teacher.
Mm.
And the so there is, yes, Phil, an extraordinarily tight
Yeah,
knit
it sounds it. Yeah,
community.
I joke with my wife a lot because we love watching documentaries, but we love watching religious documentaries, cults, stuff like
Mhm.
that. I'm like, oh, I'm just drawn in. But I joke with my wife a lot. I'm like, every time I watch something, one of these cult things, usually at the beginning, not by the end. By the end, you're like, what is this place? At the beginning, I'm always like, this sounds amazing. And even just as you're describing that, I'm like, I want to be a Mormon. You know, there's this
Yeah,
thing of like,
yeah.
we just love that community dynamic, the
Yes,
belonging, having
yes.
people there that are, they're going to do a good portion of the legwork of making you feel welcome when you move there. Like, you know, it's
Yeah.
hard making friends and building a community and
Mhm.
finding a community. Like, there is something about and churches are very similar like that in Christianity to some degree, one way or another. Obviously, there's a lot of different dynamics with staffing and all sorts of different
Mhm,
components
mhm.
at play. But that's one thing that church is well known for, is that it, on some level, is a community. It's a gathering
Yeah.
of people. Maybe in a lot of movements, a lot less local. It feels like it's become a very church shoppy kind of
Mhm.
experience. You go to the mega church an hour down the road and then don't see anyone for a week, or um, but yeah. So tell me, so you converted into Mormonism. Now, I don't
Yes.
know many people that have had that experience. Most people that I
Mhm.
know that have been Mormon, and those that are Mormon and have come out, were born into Mormonism. I don't know many
Yeah.
people that are pulled in. So what was your kind of upbringing like that led you to the place where you went
Yeah.
into Mormonism?
So I grew up in a home without religion. So my parents are now practicing Catholics. That's
Okay.
another story, okay? But during the time I was growing up, we didn't attend church. We didn't pray in our house. It just was not really a topic we talked about very
Mm,
often. Like maybe a handful of times I went to a church with some friends, or there was a time period when I was a young teenager that my mom tried to take me to see if I could just connect and make friends, but
sure.
I don't even remember all the reasons
So
that
they
didn't.
weren't super anti-religion per se.
Mm-mm.
No,
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 no.
but
They
just
were just
fairly
very
indifferent on the whole.
neutral. Right, exactly.
Mm, interesting.
Yeah. So, my mom was a nurse and ended up working on a floor that specialized heart patients. You know, she watched heart monitors. And so, my religion, if you want to call it this, when I was little, my mom would tell me about stories where people died,
Wow.
and some of them were revived.
Wow.
And there were some instances where one story she told me in particular, she went to work one day, and the the minute she got there, there was a patient in cardiac arrest who had never been there before. So she didn't
Mm,
know this patient. She didn't have a relationship with this patient. So she ends up, getting rushed into the room. There's all kinds of things going on. And she ends up, while she's there, her stethoscope falls off onto the floor and she picks it up. Anyway, this patient ends up being revived. And a few days later, she is able to have a conversation with him. And she tells me, how he explained how he was floating above his body.
wow.
And he tells her about the fact that she dropped her stethoscope,
Wow.
right?
That's
So,
wild.
as a young child, I'm thinking, well, this is interesting,
Yeah,
you
absolutely,
know?
right?
Like, and I would hear other people later, and this isn't the only type story I heard like
Mm,
this from her, but it was one of those specific, like if he was having a delusional experience or like a dream, you know, he wouldn't be able to tell or explain what actually did happen
sure,
at the very
specifics, yeah.
moment, right? He was pronounced dead. And so to me, that was like intriguing.
Wow.
It was like, well, maybe there's something
Mm,
that is consciousness that perhaps lives outside,
yeah.
the body. So I
So what
couldn't
sort of
make
age are
sense
you when
of
you're
it.
thinking this? When you're like having these kind of thoughts of like, oh, maybe there's consciousness, kind of exploring on some level some spiritual kind
You
of
know,
thoughts?
I would say preteen, early teen
Okay.
age is when this kind of thinking started coming together.
Sure.
Stories I can't even remember when they started. Like, I
Mm,
remember stories like this from my mom on and
wow.
off for some time. So when I was 15, my great grandmother died in my arms.
Wow.
To say that that rocked my world would be just an understatement. That my life changed and altered on that day. I did not know how anyone could move forward, how to exist in a world where she was not part of it.
Yeah.
And uh, this was one of those cases where, I mean, she waited for me to die. Like, she had a stroke. She was in the hospital. I knew she was waiting. I knew
Mm,
she wouldn't die till I got there if she could help it. That, this was an incredible amount of pressure. I can see now, looking back at my teenage
mm,
self. I mean, what do you do when you're 15 years old, and what you don't want more than anything else is for this person that you love more than anyone else, to leave.
yeah.
And it feels like it's uh, like her life hung in my hands for a period of time. I'm not saying, like, I knew she couldn't live forever, but I knew she was going to hold on
Yeah.
for a bit until I showed up. So, like, when I got into the hospital, I remember I hid in the bathroom for, like, I just shut the door. I didn't want to come out. I didn't know how to do this thing.
Sure. Well, very few people are taught how to do this, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Right?
it's intense, and it's when it's your first kind of major kind of experience with death, like
Yeah.
everything is new. Like, I mean, yeah. And I mean,
Yeah.
I lost my mother 3 years ago. I can't even remember now.
Mhm.
But that was my, I've lost grandparents, but I wasn't very close with them and things like, and I was probably 30, close to 35. And I
Yeah.
had never really navigated death, never really processed, never really thought, never, like you're
Mhm.
saying there, like it's making me like emotional just hearing, like when you're talking
Yeah.
about like, how do you exist in this world still when they don't? Like, what does that mean? Like, I don't understand
Yeah.
that there's no
Yeah.
great grandmother, that there's no mom. Like, what does that?
What does
Your
it
whole
mean?
world is framed, and to be going through that. I mean, I struggled at 35, so I mean, as a 15
Yeah.
year old, I mean,
I-
it's huge.
It was, right? I
Yeah.
knew it was both one of, like, the most painful, but if I can say spiritual, I mean, there was this, like, it cracked me open.
Mm,
It, like, it required a deeper level of love than I've ever had to exercise. Like, to walk out of that bathroom, right? And go over to the hospital bed, and I crawled, like, right literally in the bed with her and put my arms around her and, told her I loved her and that I knew that she couldn't stay,
mm,
and that I would hold her, until she was ready. And within a minute or two,
wow.
her, I felt something. And I don't know how to, anybody who's, like, been in the presence of someone who dies knows what I mean. She was there, she was with me, I was holding her, and then she wasn't there.
Mm,
And it's this shift that was, I felt this through. And, of course, then I go into a panic. And the that shift was so intense for me. Like the next day when I woke up, I remember like logically understanding that most people didn't know her, that of course there are cars still driving down the road and that people are going to work. But at this deep emotional level, I didn't get it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
how can the world just go on as if this didn't happen? You know, and so I went on this like deep seeking and searching. Like I wanted to understand like what happened to people when they died. About a year later, there was a teenage boy in my extended neighborhood who was shot by another teenage boy. It's interesting. It's hard for me to figure out how to tell this story because I am now married to the brother of that boy.
Wow.
But at that time, my now husband, right? He was a teenager. I was a teenager. My husband was in Germany on an exchange program. And so that they were Mormon in this household. The father wasn't living in the home anymore. So there were 3 boys. Michael, who's my husband, he was in Germany. It was Kevin, who was shot. And then there was Todd, and he was young, and he was now there just with him and his mom. And my heart, after experiencing what I did with my grandmother, you know, the year before, I just thought, oh my goodness, I can't even imagine. Like this was hard for me. And she had lived a long life.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, oh, you know, I felt like everybody, whoever like even heard of this should go to that funeral and support this mom and young son. Michael could not come back. There were reasons in which they made that decision. And so I went, and what I experienced at that Mormon funeral was not what I expected. There were all these people like suggesting they knew exactly what happened after you died.
Sure, yeah.
Right? Like they knew why they were here, where they came from, right? What was going to happen. They knew this whole plan. And I can remember going home just being so confused. Like, I just didn't know what to make of it. Like, either these people were like very delusional or they knew something that I clearly didn't.
Yeah.
And so a few months later, missionaries came and, you know, knocked on my door, and I had questions I wanted to ask them, right?
You've been waiting for them to knock on the door.
Yeah. So I was not what you would call a golden convert in Mormonism. This is like one of those people who are just like instantaneously, okay, and they're baptized 2 weeks later. That was not me. I argue with many sets of missionaries. I'm pretty sure I almost talked a few out of being Mormon. Because
that's funny.
And it's fun now to look back at teenage me and some of the things I can remember saying to them. Like, you have to believe this to believe this, I can remember saying.
Yeah.
Like, you're saying I need, like, this book, the Book of Mormon, right, says to pray about it to determine if it's true. And if it is, then this and this and this will happen. But it says it in the book. Is what, like, I'm like, you can't do that. I didn't know the word circular reasoning at that time, but I'm like, that does
You'd cottoned on to it though, right? Yeah.
Pardon?
You had cottoned on to circular reasoning though.
Yes, that's right. Like, no, you can't do that.
That's funny.
You can't start with the thing to prove the very thing that you started with. So, anyway, I ended up, you know, like arguing, I said, on and off, connected to missionaries for a few years. After I graduated from high school, all my friends that, you know, I had been with in high school, kind of many moved on to other colleges. I was living at home, commuting to a local college, and I was pretty lonely,
Mm,
actually. And there were aspects that, like, a lot of things that were not working for me, and I was ready to move on, to move out. And at some point, I think I just decided that I wasn't going to figure this out by sitting on the fence and doing nothing. So, you know, some of the missionaries that I had met with, like, a long time ago, had come back in the area to Christmas Carol. About 11 o'clock last night, some woman in, a Mormon congregation said, "Hey, Claudine, I think, if you decide to be baptized tomorrow, these guys would stay an extra day." And because they were going to head back to what the states in which they lived. And
right.
I'm like, okay. So, I just jumped in and thought, I'm going to have a life experience. I'm going to see.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how it started for me, but
Right.
they did an interview. This is how Mormonism is. They do a baptismal interview, and they're like, "Well, do you think, Joseph Smith is well, I think he taught some good things. He taught some life affirming principles." I can remember saying, "I don't know if he's a prophet, but I would love to believe that what he's saying is true," and that
Right.
was enough. They let me get baptized. So, of
Nice.
course
So
they
it's a
did.
fairly low entry bar then, for the most
Yeah.
part.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's
That's
right.
funny.
So I just jumped in at about 10 months later. I ended up transferring to BYU, and then met lots of Mormon young
Mm,
adults, and, stayed there and graduated. But that's where, I kind of got more infiltrated, and, you
sure.
know,
I mean,
but
that's a perfect time to be,
yeah.
absorbing a new religion, is going to college
Mm-hmm.
in this amazing tight knit community. I mean, I talked to several people
Yeah.
online from, BYU that are there and have deconverted, but are enjoying the benefits of a much cheaper education because of it. So they're kind of
Yes.
undercover or, whatever.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the ideal place if you're in, right? I mean, if you're
Yeah.
in that
Well,
system and you're
I
exploring it
wanted
and
friends who didn't drink and do drugs, and who I
yeah,
could have interesting discussions with and would have a good time, right? And oh my
yeah,
God, like, that was the place for that. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
no one did the drinking and the drugs, right?
Right.
And it was for the most part, it was an amazing academic environment.
Yeah. No, I've
And
heard that for sure.
mhm, mhm.
Yeah. Wow. So you're just out of high school, basically, maybe a year or so into college, and you kind of are over there.
Yeah,
So you're still very young.
still
And you said you spent
mhm.
about 27 years in the belly of the beast. And so
Yes.
you bought in, right? At some point you went from
Yeah.
going, let's see what this Joseph guy's
Mhm.
got to say. I like some of his ideas. Let's see if he's prophety. And at some point you bought in enough to be like, no, this guy's a prophet and I'm
Yeah.
in.
It was a slow process, I'll say, a partial buy-in to partial, like, there were always just a couple of things I'm like, I don't think I can go there.
Right. Yeah.
But I think when I had children and then started teaching them, and then really got more involved in meaningful service type, experiences, and meeting other women doing the same kind
Mm,
of thing, and then you're just surrounded with it. It's
yeah.
like, you know, it's an intense, time consuming commitment if you go all into Mormonism, because it's
Sure.
like 3 hours of church on Sunday. Plus, like I said, everybody has a job. So there's all the getting ready to teach parts and things that happen during the week. Plus, you're supposed to, read your scriptures every day, say your prayers, do like listen to leaders of the church give all their talk. I mean, there's a lot happening.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It can be like a part-time job to be a full-time Mormon.
I can believe it. I can believe it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So
Yeah.
what happened? Where did it all go wrong? Right. So you're in the system and you're kind of
Yes.
you're presumably like enjoying it for the
Yeah.
most part. I mean, maybe a few niggles here
Mm-hmm.
and there. You maybe think a couple questions and go, "Oh, let's just not go there. That's kind of a bit out there anyway. It's not as
Yeah.
relevant or whatever." But where did it start to kind of go
Yeah.
wrong? That's a very funny term because I'm not sure either
So
of us would say wrong, but
in Mormonism, they call things that, like what you're talking about, a couple things you can't buy into or whatever, they
Mm,
call that put that on your shelf. All right.
right.
Like those are
Yeah.
these questions you have. You just stick them on a shelf, like, and know that someday it will make sense. Someday you
Mm.
will get answers. So what happened was, like, some things I didn't ever totally buy into. Other things, like my shelf was starting to get pretty heavy.
Right. Walls kind of starting to kind of pull forward a
Mhm.
bit.
And that there was several kind of bigger things coming into that I didn't really realize how heavy they were making my shelf at
Mm,
the time, but it really was weighing me down.
mm,
um, Things with regard to sexual purity and the impact those teachings were having on young people. I
mhm,
was kind of in an arena with some of my jobs within the church and some of the other things I was doing, for work or volunteer, that I had a unique opportunity to connect with many teenagers and then also young adults and interview those young adults about their experiences as a teenager.
sure.
And the more information I got, the more I was like, but wait, this is this is the shame that is being caused is so much more intense than the problems that that
Mm,
religion is telling me, right? Like,
right. The things you're supposed to be trying to
so,
avoid.
like, yeah, exactly. Like the end result was not producing, like, even in, the religious sphere, they would say, okay, in marriage, sex is beautiful, right? Like,
Hmm.
that's what religion would say. And yet all the shame that was not producing sexually healthy people to go into their marriage, right?
Sure.
Like they were carrying over so much that they weren't able to shift gears like
Mm,
religion says. And
yeah.
so I was having some of that evidence. um I was also teaching, and in the course of teaching I was like discovering more and more things that were not adding up. And but what really was my compelling reason to really look harder and investigate deeper was my oldest son.
Mm,
He was 19 or 20, and he went into a severe depression,
mm,
such that he was sleeping like 20 hours a day.
wow.
At that age, he like completely shut down. And he wasn't living in the same state as we were at the time. He actually ended up moving with my parents and going to a college by them temporarily. And like I said, they're not Mormon. That wasn't part of his, but he had, it turns out, read what's called the CES letter. I don't know if you've heard about this within the
Hmm.
realm of Mormons leaving, but he had read that and several other things. And the information was so challenging for him. It
Sure.
just shattered his faith.
Yeah. Do you want to give a quick cliff notes of the CES, just because a lot of people listening might not know kind of some of the
Mm-hmm.
main outlines of that? In fact, I
Yeah.
probably don't know all the
Well,
outlines of that either. So
it's been a while
yeah, it
actually
has been
since
a
I've
while.
read it, and I've read so much else. I'm like trying to remember which facts, but to to sum it up, when you think about Mormonism, it's a relatively new religion
Hmm.
in that it goes back to the early days, and I don't know, 1820s, 30s, right? Experiences that Joseph Smith had, and the very truth claims of Mormonism are connected to the specific experiences
Mm.
of Joseph Smith. And so this letter basically shows in many, many ways that, first of all, the stories that the church has been giving have not been complete at minimum, okay? Big pieces missing, and not minor factors. Factors that actually really matter connected back to the truth claims of the church. So, like, when you go there and you realize twofold, like, one, the church hasn't been disclosing. They've been, you know, some people feel outright dishonest, lying to them. And at minimum, though, there's no way around it. They have omitted significant facts, and not just in one area. So you go there and you're like, whoa, first of all, it's not true. Second of all, the very organization I have trusted, the organization that has asked me year after year, if I am honest in all my dealings with my fellow man, right? This is like one of the, at least for adults who have gone to the temple, this is like, they bring you in to get your temple recommend. They ask you these questions. They actually define what honesty is. And if you go to the very definition in their most basic, they call it gospel principles, right? It includes omissions of this sort as being right. So they are not following their very own they're not walking their talk. This is like lack of integrity. And at the expense, not just like towards anybody, towards their very own people who have been sacrificing everything for this organization. And so like this can throw like people for a loop like you would not believe.
Yeah, absolutely.
So this is for those who this is part of their reason out. We're talking betrayal trauma. And for my son, I would say on the subconscious level, this wasn't, he wouldn't have been able to quite fully express this at the time. But for him, there was no win, no matter what he did. If he told us and we didn't believe him, right? Then, we could reject him, we could be disappointed, we could try to rescue him. There's all these possibilities if we don't, agree. But if he did, if we read it, he tells us, we read it, and we lose our faith and our purpose for life and all of our friends and everything we've believed in, and it's his fault.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? Like, again, this is
it's a lot to carry at that age.
Like, like he can see, I can't do this to my parents and I can't do this. And so he shut down. Of course he did. He couldn't speak. I didn't have any idea what was going on for quite a while. All I knew is whenever I brought up anything connected to church, there was a look on his face that my mom sensed, my life experience said trauma. This kid has been, like, I was starting to worry he had been raped, or beaten, or like something that was like, it was like, this was not trivial. I could tell that. And, it's like one of those things, you want to be tender and you don't want to, no, he's got to come to this when he's ready. But like, I want to be there for him. I want him to heal. But of course, at that time, I wanted him to heal and I wanted him to come back to church.
Sure, of course. I mean, you don't want him to lose his salvation and all these kind of concepts, right?
Yeah. And in the process of being with him, there came a time when, all I can say is this was, I call this maybe besides my great grandmother and that which was the other kind of, this was a spiritual experience for me. The Mormon me would have said, and the Holy Ghost came and talked to me, right? And said, now I don't care if you want to call it God, your higher self. Like, I definitely had a message that came from not the indoctrinated me, from some other part of me that like I like almost heard literally that said, for Ian to heal, you need to let go of your desire that he ever come back. And I can remember thinking, oh, I don't know how to do that. Like it sent me for a little bit of a shock for a bit.
Yeah.
And I just started to breathe in and start looking at his pain. And again, something cracked open. I can't put it into words. But when I did, in fact, actually want him to heal more than I wanted anything else, he felt it. Like there was a shift. You can't fake that.
Yeah.
like when it was real and I could look him in the eye, you know, and it was like, I am here for you, whatever it is. Let's do this together. Right? Like I will read anything you want me to read. If you want to remove your name from the records, you know, whatever it is, I 100% I support you. I want you to heal. And at that point, I made one request. I just said, for my sake, would you please wait 2 months before you have your name removed? You know, would you be willing to consider that? Just to give me a little time to adjust, and I will be with you. Like I said, I will read anything. Let's do this together. And at that point, he was like, so sweet and and he said, sure, Mom. You know, and when I opened up, that's when I did my reading. And of course, what I found was not what I expected.
Right. Yeah. The shelf came off the wall.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, did it. And the part I didn't tell you about was from the time we brought Ian back home to live with us, and I'm starting to help him to heal, Ian's brother, Sean, is getting ready for, and he left on his mission.
Wow. Good timing.
So my shelf crashed 2 months after. And so Sean is not yet out of the Mexico MTC. I have 22 months before he is going to be back. And I'm going to have any kind of real access to him. At that time, things have changed, but at that time there were 4 phone calls. Wow. And his companion was present. Wow. And you could email, but this is not like the kind of thing. And I didn't even know if my emails might be monitored. Like I had no idea at this point who to trust anymore. Like I did not trust the church.
Right. And
so that probably was the hardest part, to figure out, how do I cope with this? How do I handle because there were moments I just wanted to get on a plane and go, you know, talk to him. But he was an adult, and I did not want to coerce, right? Sure. I didn't want to. So figuring out, okay, how am I going to handle this? What am I going to tell him and when? How am I going to be honest with him? And give him the option, should he want to take it, which I also thought was the most useful for him at that time, to not have a faith crisis on his mission and be alone, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. You're highlighting something that, I mean, this comes up again and again and again and again, is that while like our deconstructions and our deconversions and our crises of faith, whatever we call them, are deeply personal, unique experiences. They never happen in a vacuum. Like we are tied to all these different people, be it family, friends, church communities, whatever it looks like. And it's really hard for us it's impossible for you to untangle those webs. And so, you know, that's one of the benefits of something that has quite cult-like behavior, like church, Mormonism, Christianity. Any kind of religion can be quite cult-ish in a sense. I'm not saying it's a cult, but you know, it has the different elements. But it
I don't have a problem with that word, Phil. Like I get it. It fits the bite model. So I don't use it constantly and all the time because it's not always useful, and it's a
Yeah.
trigger word for lots of people, right? But it's an authoritarian religion, absolutely,
Yeah.
right? For sure. And um, and by that I mean it has high expectations, extraordinarily strict rules, and next to no tolerance for difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when you combine those things, and then you add God and have to and must,
Yeah. And he's holding a big stick
that's
over you in case you do it wrong.
hmm
Yeah.
and it definitely, I mean, there is mind control. I can now see exactly how that came to be for me. This was part of my deconstruction. Like how, as I started to get the signals, like what happened to my brain? How did I let go of this and this? How did I jump into that circular reasoning?
Yeah.
And then what were all the pieces I had to figure out for myself
Yeah.
to feel sane again?
Yeah, but it's I mean it's remarkably hard to go on a journey like you've gone on where you're juggling. I mean, like so I know your whole family dynamics, but you've got these two sons that are very different experiences right now. One's gone,
Mhm,
this is not legit, and I'm like just
mhm.
totally traumatized by it. The other one's going, presumably on some level, he's going for mission. I know that there's different tolerance
Yeah.
levels at which people choose to go on mission, but a lot of people do. He's
Mhm.
bought in on some level, and then so you go, well,
Yeah.
my decision here in the middle will have an impact on these two people. Never mind,
Mhm.
the 200 other people that I'm in relationship here, there, and
Yeah.
everywhere, and how that works in each one of them is unique, and it will
Mhm.
affect me. It will affect my family. It will affect how we connect. It will affect how
Yeah.
they feel. It will affect their future. It will affect my work. It will affect. It's just this avalanche, and so
Oh,
even though we're starting to see these cracks in the foundation, we're starting to see the shelf sagging and pulling on the wall. There's this part within us at the same time wanting to kind of like see what happens if we like tug the shelf, but at the same time desperately holding the shelf
yeah.
up, and we're at this kind of tension war with ourselves.
Yes.
um it's a very, very hard problem. I guess this is why I guess so coming out of this, you now, again, I mostly know from your Instagram. I know you've got website and bits and pieces, but your Instagram is Post Mormon Mental Health. Have I got that
Yes.
right? I
Mhm,
remembered
mhm.
it right. Yeah.
Yes,
Um,
correct.
and so you are obviously reading and judging the book by its cover, wanting to help people that are coming out of Mormonism, post Mormon,
Uh,
with their mental health. Like,
yes.
what are some of the biggies that you are looking at? Maybe, I'm sure you've been through this,
Uh,
your son, different people that
right.
you've experienced over the years. You've probably uh, built that more and more and seen certain
Mhm.
patterns develop and things
Sure.
going on there. But what are kind of some of the big kind of issues at play at that beginning stage where you are going, this is starting to fall apart, but it feels like there's a
Yeah.
lot of potential, almost like mind control, like what you're saying there, like these systems
Mhm.
at play, these very cult like practices, whether intentional or not,
Mhm.
that do set us up to be quite, um we're not at
Side
a healthy place to make
Yes.
those decisions,
Yeah.
to go on this journey. We're dealing with a lot of
Right.
trauma, with mental health issues, with depression, with
Yeah.
fear, with anxiety. um
Mhm.
what
Yeah,
are some
you
of
were
the big
set
things?
up to be dependent on that
Mm,
organization, So I think, for evangelical Christianity, at some the message is fundamentally you are broken, right?
yeah. Yeah.
And therefore you need a savior. If you don't believe you're broken, I mean, that is what has to come first.
Hmm. Yeah, that's the good
In
news. When you go out
Mormonism,
and
right?
evangelize, you go out and tell people you realize you're terrible and awful.
Yeah.
It's a bizarre model, but that's
Yes,
how it
right?
starts. You
You
have to
have to
realize
convince
that
them.
first. Yeah.
Yes. So, and in Mormonism, they would use slightly different language, but the idea over here is you have to prove yourself worthy.
Mm,
That's the purpose, right? So, but again, they have to create shame to be the solution.
mm,
And this is in part what I was seeing in some of these pieces I was having to put together because I didn't have certain kinds of shame until I had the missionary discussions. You
Wow.
know, they had to really fundamentally convince me that that I was that broken, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That I had been doing things wrong. That, you know, and I think it's that sexual piece that is
Mm.
probably the most powerful that is utilized towards teenagers, you
Yeah.
know, in a time when they are developing, they are coming into themselves, they're, you know, having sexual feelings emerge as they enter puberty, right? And that's
Yeah.
100% normal and natural.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, in Mormonism, what, and I don't know if you've seen this, like me talk about this on the post, but they talk about, you know, any breaking of the law of chastity as being a sin next unto murder.
Yeah.
Okay. So, like, when you really think about it, like, people understand kids lie. No child will be honest all the time.
Yeah. Or
Now,
adult most of the
sometimes,
time.
right. But for sure, developmentally, kids are going to do it for all different. Sometimes they just have an imagination. They don't even think about
Sure.
lying. They
Yeah.
actually think they are Superman for a while or whatever.
Mhm.
But like, there are also times they're not honest because they don't want to get in trouble or these kinds of things, right? I mean, no parent, at least I can't imagine, a loving parent the very first time, you know, their 5-year-old or 3-year-old, 4-year-old, like, you are like a murderer, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
now you need to go confess. But this is basically what's being done to our 11, 10,
Mm.
11, 12, 13-year-old kids.
Yeah.
Like, something like, even if in that realm, like, I don't think sin is like, already you're causing the shame, just that word alone,
Mm.
instead of like, this is a developmentally normal part of growing up.
Yeah.
So if you want to teach kids like like honesty as a principle, like, that can be a beautiful thing. We want to teach kids that, you know, they have sexual feelings. That doesn't mean they can just impose themselves on other humans anytime, right? Like, they
Sure.
need to
Right.
learn how to cope with that, how to deal with that, what that means, how to engage in the world, like how to have a better understanding of these feelings.
Mm.
So the principles, you know, there would be like, oh, you've discovered this thing. Like, that's amazing. That means you are a healthy human
Yep.
teenager, right? Now, this means we get to start having those conversations about, you know, consent and how you want to make decisions about this as you grow older. And let's talk about
Mm.
this and let's talk about this. And let's like look at it at all different angles. That would be like a healthy approach to
Sure.
like talk more. But
Yep.
what happens in religion is there's no discussion for in most people's homes. It's no, 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 no,
Mm.
no, bad, 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 right?
Yep.
Like, you are the problem from the get-go. Don't feel this. And the moment you like sin next to murder, go confess to the bishop.
Mm.
You know, this like, and in Mormonism, they have a meeting, it's called sacrament. I know Catholicism has sacrament, right? But in
Sure.
Mormonism, every week, everybody, it's the 12-year-old boys and up, it's always boys in Mormonism who pass the sacrament, bless and pass it. So they just take the little trays around to aisle, you know. So, but the bishop, if a boy is, for example, masturbating and comes in and confesses, you know, may tell that boy, you can't pass the sacrament.
Right.
Or to a boy or a girl, you can't take the sacrament, meaning you're sitting on that row with your family and everybody can see you don't grab the bread off the plate, right? This is public shaming.
Yeah. This is the worst
So,
part of my teenage years, was the
yeah.
weighing up that if there was anything that I had, like, if I had masturbated that week, or, you know, if I've watched porn, or, you know, had a thought about something or whatever, that's it. You know, I can't touch the communion. But if I don't touch the communion, then everyone's going to know I did that.
Everyone
And so
knows,
I've got
right?
to toss up between okay, do I want God pissed off with me, or do I want everyone to know I
Yes.
masturbate? And it's like,
Yeah.
oh, and
Right?
it was different outcomes most of the time, but most of the time I just took the sacrament. I rolled the dice, you know. I was
Yeah.
more fearful of what people thought of me than
Right.
God, apparently. So,
Well,
but it's
Mormonism would take that to
terrifying.
the next level, Phil. And
Mm,
without, like, because you're a teenager, some adult is going to call you in at least every 6 months and start asking you questions, right?
mhm.
So, in the midst of that, you either can lie, then you
Yeah,
have it like point blank, right? And a lot of teens go that route.
yep, yeah.
And and others though believe that the bishop, because this is part of what they're taught, has this mantle of authority. Basically he's going to know anyway,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right? So if you can't actually lie with that, like some of the young people believe that
yeah.
message, and so then they feel and these bishops have zero training. They're just
Mm,
regular humans who get called from the congregation. And then the next week, they're supposed to be in charge.
it's
And
wild.
yeah, so this is for the youth. And I'm starting to see some of these things and the consequences. And the consequences of the lack of discussion. I
Mm,
worked with a group for a while that was, I mean, it was geared towards helping the situation of very young children being exposed to pornography. We're talking prepubescent, okay?
sure.
So most of us, I think the large majority of adults in the world agree that exposure to pornography is not ideal for 5, 6, 7-year-old kids, right?
Yeah.
So like that actually isn't where any controversy is,
Right. You're going to be really hard
right?
pressed to find someone to debate you on that one.
Right, but that actually is when young people are being exposed now
Yeah.
because of the internet. But what's happening is, they don't even know the word. They actually maybe need someone to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I worked with a group, and I still support the idea of parents having open conversations with their very young kids to at least say, hey, and this stuff exists. And here's what you might like. And if it happens, like, please come talk to me. Here's what you do. This really
Yeah.
isn't healthy for kids your age. And nobody should take a picture of you without your clothes on, and nobody should ask you. Like, these
Sure.
conversations are useful and helpful. What I ended up discovering, though, in the midst of working with that, was that the parents' reaction was far more scarring than
Mm,
pornography exposure
wow.
on the kid. And so this was another one of those like huge shelf items that, ended up happening. And so, like, and realizing the more I did interviews and surveys, the more I really realized people are not being given any information. These
Yeah.
aren't like, and the parents are scared. And in the religious paradigm, as a parent, I was scared too. There's good reason when you're in that paradigm to be terrified,
Mm-hmm.
actually, because of all the
Yeah.
things that you hear.
Yeah. I mean,
And it doesn't feel like there's a way out.
no, it's a biggie. I mean, it only really became a big deal in Protestant Christianity in recent, decades, really, like,
Mhm.
last probably 50 years or so. But it's one of the big things now. I mean, I went through youth group, and literally every week youth group, we'd break into male female groups. The girls would get some sort of talk about how you to hang in there, and your only value is basically in getting married, but you're just wonderful as a single person. You keep doing that, you keep running after
Mhm.
God, and eventually someone will be there for you, despite the fact there's 2 females for every 1 male that are single in the church.
Mm.
But no one was bringing up the question of, like, how does that work? Has God got a plan? At
Yeah.
some point he's going to double all the males. So that was the females. They often had their kind of like singles talk, and be good or whatever. But everyone knows girls should be pure, and we don't even. That's not even a discussion,
Yeah.
right? That's just like is
Mhm.
holdover of property, basically, right? I mean, it's just
Right.
terrible.
No,
But
it's its own kind of sex trafficking, really,
it's horrific.
right?
Yeah,
It's turning their bodies into a material object,
yeah,
as if a body is pure or not pure.
yeah,
It's a body, right?
yeah.
You can't bodies cannot be defiled
Hmm.
by by a choice someone makes, right? Like, or in the case of, you know, if someone is raped, that's not defiling them. That's
Yeah,
like all on the perpetrator.
yeah,
That that person is the one that has done the horrific thing.
yeah.
This is like, it doesn't mean anything. Like, has, I mean, to connect this with worth, it's just so, or purity
It's
or whatever, that
horrifying.
it's like, it is. It really, really, really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah, and it hard holds over from property. That's really what it
Yeah,
boils down to. Is
it
it's
does.
the language of the Old and New Testament where women were property, and that's not a
Yes.
statement about religion. That's a statement about the world for, up until a few hundred years ago,
Yeah.
and is in the world now. A lot of the
Yeah.
world, and so. But you can see it in the way parents talk about their daughters that lose their virginity. They literally talk
Mhm.
about their daughters almost as their chattel. They're like,
Mhm.
oh, what look you've done to me. And it's like,
Yeah.
nothing happened to you. This is not your
Yeah.
property that someone stole or broke, but that's the language or the analogies people use. I remember the analogies people, youth pastors, and these, I think youth pastors and youth leaders are like 22, 23. I mean, like, these guys are all addicted to porn and masturbating, and I mean, they're all in the same boat anyway. um
Mhm.
and the analogies they use about women and their worth. I remember one passed around a rose and said, everyone pass the rose from rose, and as the rose would fall apart as everyone touched it, and it's like, now who wants this rose at
Uh,
the end? And you're like,
yeah.
oh wow, that's a really messed up analogy. No one thinks like, well, maybe I think God would still want the rose, right? I mean, I don't know, Jesus would still want the rose,
Mormonism
or
has the same
it's
object
it's
lesson.
awful,
It's
it's
like,
awful.
but it's licked cupcake, chewed gum,
Uh-huh, yeah.
crinkled paper, the same kind of thing, though, as if that's like, it does not connect. It's not the
Yeah.
same.
And then in the other room, you've got the guys, and I'm in the guys' room, and every week it's like, all right, guys, who fell this week? Who screwed up this week? And it's the same question every week. And basically, all the teenage boys did, because the problem is with talking about it all the freaking time and making it the gospel, right? They never talked about
Yeah.
love and how you could love the kids at your
Yeah.
school
Yeah.
well, or things. They talked about, did you watch porn this week? Did you masturbate? Did you screw up
Hmm.
or whatever? Did you think about that girl Sally you like at school? Or
Yeah.
like all, and that's all we did every single. And I remember we had like accountability groups, so you break into groups of 3 or 4, and you had to tell each other if you screwed up. And I'm like, we're
Mhm.
all like, it's like blind leading the blind scenario. I mean, I've no idea how
Yeah.
this is supposed to change or break through. And it did. I literally went through my entire teenage years feeling like utter shit. Really, I
Yeah.
mean, they got that low value, shame, bad, you're
Yes.
nothing but a worm in good through that mechanism of sex. That's how I
Yeah.
saw everything in my relationship with God, with everything. My relationship with God was, when you pray to God, well, you kind of got to have a buffer. So if you'd watch porn or something, you would never
Mhm.
pray straight after. You almost like try and do some good things, and then you could go and ask God for forgiveness. Try and
Yeah.
even the balance. But my it was just muddled, and that's
Well, they
how.
need that, though.
Yeah.
Religion needs that to convince you you're a problem, right?
Mm,
Broken, unworthy, so that they can then keep you hooked that you need this solution. Because
yeah.
if you actually just believe, guess what? I'm a healthy person who's growing and learning and developing,
Yeah.
and that, you know, and worthy of love. If that's your default, it's going to be a lot harder to convince people that you need this, you know, solution, which
Right.
isn't actually God. It's God as defined by particular men,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, evidenced by the fact that you and I had slightly different men telling us which God was,
Yeah,
we
that's
were
it.
going to be. And so this is interesting to me I mean, I see it quite often. I imagine you see it quite often that, and I don't think about this a lot through this lens, but this is a big holdover. When people start to deconstruct their faith, they start to find a bit of freedom there is a great fear in having freedom because we don't trust ourselves. We actually do kind of believe,
Mhm.
well, actually, I shouldn't be allowed freedom. It's scary that I'm
Yeah,
thinking on my
right.
own, that I'm doing this, that I'm, exploring doing this without the accountability group or the pastor or the bishop or whoever's keeping me in
Mhm.
line.
Mhm.
How do you go about helping people that are walking through that kind of start to see a bit of freedom, start to find a bit more self-worth?
Yes, yeah. So, like that, it takes some time and practice to begin to consider yourself, what you think, what you feel, your own preferences, what you like, what you don't like. And I just mean on simple things. Like, I'm guessing it may be similar in Christianity, but Mormons aren't asked like, what do you like? What do you want? It's all
Mm,
no, like, here's what you should want is to figure out what God wants and do that.
right.
And we tell you what the God wants, and all you have to do is follow it, right? It's obedience, obedience, obedience. So you end up not fully developing a sense of self.
Mm,
And and you have been conditioned to believe what I call is a fixed mindset,
mm,
right? Which means that there is some perfect out there, and you're supposed to keep looking outside of yourself and mold yourself to it,
mm.
and the whole goal is to figure out that whatever that is, and it's external, and it's fixed, and it's right, like,
Mhm.
and so, like, you have to lose yourself completely. I mean, we talked about sexuality, but purity culture and all of this really comes down to completely lose yourself, at which point you have earned righteousness, right?
Mm.
Once you no longer exist and have become exactly like this perfect being that you could never actually be anyway, right?
That's funny.
So it takes away, like, when children grow up in this, they never get to go through the stage of being able to say no
Mm,
so that they can trust their yes. As simple as, like, with toys, you have to share. Well, why do they have to share?
mm,
Because
mm.
external authority said you do, and we're going to impose fairness on you and act as if what you want doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
Versus, guess what, it actually, you get to sometimes say no. This is yours, you get to choose if and when you share it, and with
Mhm.
who. And as they start to own it, well, what are some reasons you might want to consider sharing?
Right.
When might sharing be fun for you?
Mm.
Do you think you might ever want, like, having this dialogue, right? Do you see the
Yeah, yeah,
difference?
yeah. It's huge. I mean,
Like, where one is internal, like, they come up with their own reasons and why it would make sense.
yeah.
Like, well, how about when you go over to your other friend's house? Do you like it when they share with you? And you just kind of start to figure
Mm,
out, well, what do you think you might want to do? What kind of friend do you want to be?
yeah.
And knowing, guess what? Sometimes maybe you don't want to for that time, and that's okay too. Like,
Yeah.
that's the practice that's really important for kids to have.
Yeah.
So for people deconstructing, there's a little bit of going back and, like, practicing this thing, and it's a little bit messy and it does feel a little scary at
Mm,
first, but in a fixed mindset, you can never win. There
yeah.
is no win. You always are never enough. You will never make it. Okay. It's always something wrong with you.
Yeah.
In a growth mindset, so we want to help them move from the fixed mindset to a growth mindset. In the growth mindset, there is no wrong.
Mm, yeah.
There is no decision in which you can make which will not be an opportunity to learn and grow from,
Yeah. That's huge. Yeah.
right?
It's massive. My wife's a teacher, so she talks about growth mindset all the time with the kids. So
Yeah.
I hear this so
Yes.
much, and I'm like, never thought of it in that context. But you're right.
Yeah.
It's that platonic kind of like, there's the perfect world and everything else is a shadow, and we're trying to
Yeah.
get back to the, whether it's the Garden of Eden or heaven or whatever. But like,
Yes.
we can't achieve this like perfect standard. And it's interesting. What fascinates me about that is how, I don't know about you. I was going to say how many times you heard this. I don't know if you have, but to me, I have heard countless Christians saying, well, I don't even know why atheists don't go around just killing and raping, and because they must have
Yeah.
no moral compass. But it highlights that
Yes.
thing of, there's a moral compass that is developed and there's a moral compass that is given. And
Yes.
ultimately, one you follow because you have to, the other you follow
Yes.
because you want to. That's who you have become. And actually,
Yes.
the following a moral compass that you've been given is actually really terrifying, because the
Yes.
second that you for some reason decide, oh, I could get away with this, or I might not have to, or
Yeah.
whatever, you've not developed this thing that says, oh, that's wrong, I'm not going to do it. You'll
Mm-hmm.
make all sorts of exceptions, right? So the moral compass that's given still says thou shalt not murder, but it does say, well, you can murder all the Canaanites, right? And so now we go,
Mm-hmm.
oh,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Mm-hmm.
this given moral compass that I can interpret in different ways, rather than
Yeah.
actually having developed my own thing of going, I actually think I'm just not going to kill people. It feels really good not
Yeah.
doing that,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and so it's really interesting. I hadn't
Yes.
thought of it like that, but it's a scary thing for, I mean, the fact that people say that all the time, it
Mhm.
highlights that it's a scary thing for people to think, oh, I'm gonna have to develop my
Yeah.
own morality, my own set of ethics, that rather than just having,
Yeah.
this is what you should do, this is how to do your life, this is, how to conduct yourself.
They have actually, they don't realize it, but they have learned to worship rules.
Mm,
You know,
yeah,
because that's really what it boils down to in obedience culture, right? As long
yeah.
as you follow the rules, you'll be safe, is the message. And the message is you are broken. So why would you think you can do it, right? When you get
Mm,
out of that and you realize when you're starting from this other foundation, actually you're not broken. Actually, the rules you develop by looking at and liking your own reasons, like it's not logical to murder people.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
we don't come wanting to do that,
It's not our default.
right? It's
Maybe
not
a
our default.
tiny fraction of people, maybe at a
No,
push, but generally
it's
speaking, I
not.
think that's not going to happen.
No, actually, the growth mindset is the default.
Yeah.
You know, you look at any kid learning to walk. They
Mm,
don't go, oh crap, I fell down 50 times. Clearly, I'm not going to be one of these humans who's going to be able to walk.
right.
I'm going to need my parents to carry me around for the rest of my life.
Mm,
I'm
yeah.
I'm the problem here.
Yeah. It would
Can't do
take
it
a
if you give up
dysfunctional
now,
parent to do that,
right?
right? Yeah.
Yeah, right. They have to be taught the fixed. The actual get-go is like, no, I can totally do it. I don't,
Mm,
and falling isn't the problem.
yeah. Wow.
It's it's you just keep figuring out, well, I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to keep learning. You know, it's the Thomas Edison. How many times did he not invent the light bulb before he did?
Mm,
So, because if he would have had the fixed mindset, you know, this, he would have given up a
yeah.
long time before, but every time was like, oh, I learned something from that time that didn't work, I learned something, right? So in that growth, which really is the default, there is the ability to keep moving forward without needing to be perfect ever,
Yeah.
right? Which
Yeah.
means you can actually kind of love yourself on the way.
Yeah. You can just celebrate
And
moving forward. Yeah.
but it's totally normal for all those fears to come up.
Mm,
That conditioning in one's head is powerful. It's in the subconscious. I do not recommend that we fight it,
mm,
because then you're at war with yourself, and that is a war you cannot win,
yeah.
right? So what is more useful is to notice it,
Mm,
become more and more aware of it. And you could say to friend it, to parent it, to welcome it, to enter into a relationship with it,
mm,
knowing that fear, when it shows up, it's part of you, but it's not all of you.
Yeah.
You're actually bigger and more powerful than that.
Mm.
And you actually have the capacity to feel it without believing you're in danger.
Yeah, that's really good. I have chronic pain, and chronic pain, generally speaking, your brain is constantly getting hundreds of thousands of signals, and basically it filters them into two categories: are you safe or is
Mhm,
it dangerous? And
mhm,
if you get more dangerous signals than safety signals, your brain goes, okay, feel pain.
mhm,
Vice versa, if you get more safety signals, you go, oh, you're fine. You
mhm,
don't need to feel pain. And it's why, like, you can,
mhm,
I don't know, blow your leg off on a landmine and still not feel pain necessarily. Your brain is weighing up all the dangers and the safeties and goes, well, actually, you've got a medic right there. You're seeing whatever, it's okay. We don't need to feel pain right now for whatever reason. But it also means that people who were bit by a spider 3 years ago can scratch their leg on a twig and think, oh, I've been bitten by a spider, and feel agony. And the pain is just, it's
mhm.
really the way all pain
Yeah,
is decided by the brain.
it's
But
it's an interpretation, yeah.
it's fascinating because
Mhm,
one of the techniques they've uh, worked with me and work with people with chronic pain is listening to your body and go, oh wow, you're in pain, and going, okay, brain, wow, oh, so you think that mine is in my hand, so you think I'm in
mhm,
danger because I'm typing on my keyboard, because in the past that caused pain, but it doesn't really
mhm,
cause me pain anymore. I am safe, aren't I? I'm and almost
mhm.
soothing
Yeah,
yourself with that safety,
right,
and it's acknowledging, oh,
right.
in the past you were that was a really terrifying thing. If you masturbated,
Yes,
that meant you were going to burn in hell for eternity. Or I know it's so
yes,
different from Mormons, but
right.
but that's, we know that's not true, and actually you're okay, you're safe, whether that's a
Mhm,
good or bad thing. It's not important right now. You're safe. It's okay. Let's move
mhm.
forward. Like, it's such a
Yes.
totally different way of caring for ourselves, especially when we've
Mhm,
typically found that in another person. And I guess, is
mhm.
this a dynamic that it exists certainly for us in the evangelical world, or out of the evangelical world, but I find a lot of people come to me wanting me to be their new authority figure. So
Right.
I'm out of this bubble. I'm learning to be free to whatever, to whatever.
Mhm,
Tell me what
mhm,
freedom is. Tell me what to believe. Tell me what to do. Tell me.
mhm.
And I I try and walk the line of people genuinely guidance, and that's a great thing. But actually, on the whole, I'm really very reticent to do that, because
Yeah.
I think we're just filling another, we're
Mhm,
just giving them another crutch in a sense.
mhm,
Is that
mhm.
something that people, how would you help people that are needing to kind of make that transition from being reliant on the system, on people, on a leader,
Yeah.
to trying to learn to do that themselves, or maybe with others in a more healthy way? I don't know. Do you have
Yeah,
thoughts on
no,
that?
it's a great question, and I'm with you. It was one of my fears, like, stepping out. Like, I don't wanna be anyone's guru, right? That's the last thing I want to show up as, and
Yeah.
it's caused a lot of soul searching, for me. I think when I take a breath, right? And what people actually need is some tools, some strategies, some skills. Those can be shared, right? You can
Mm,
show, like what we just talked about with the, oh, hey, fear or pain or brain, right? Like a skill to learn to see what that could sound like, the dialogue in their own head.
mm,
So, getting tools, practical tools, strategies to deal with these moments is very useful for them.
mm.
Dialogue and having someone who's outside them begin to ask them questions is extraordinarily useful.
Yeah.
So that's another, like, that's part of, like, a really essential part of coaching.
Yeah.
So when someone, like, start to ask them, and there are sometimes when they get stuck because they haven't had exposure to any other possible way, right? Like, like, I get it. I don't like this thought pattern, or I don't like the way this worked for me when I was younger. I want to parent different. I'm just
Mm,
giving you an example here, right? But I can't even imagine what that could look like. So that's where I can then share several options and say,
mm.
well, here's some ways you could consider. That could sound like this, or that could sound like this, or you might want to try this, right? So you're opening up and expanding their
Yeah.
what they can see is like that platter to choose from.
Yeah.
and well, which one do you think would be useful for you, or which one might you be interested in trying?
Yeah. It
And
feels like it's a very subtle line to walk. I know for me, not on my side when I'm helping someone, but I feel like when I've sought that in other people, especially early on in my deconstruction,
mm-hmm.
I've I've really struggled to acknowledge that in myself, or spot that in myself. A lot of time I'm like, oh no, I'm just dialoguing with someone or whatever, but I'm actually
Mm-hmm.
often building this person up into my new prophet Joseph Smith, or new Jesus
Yes,
Christ, or
yes,
Billy
yes.
Graham, or whoever your hero is.
Yeah.
Um, have you found that in your journey, that how did you find yourself disconnecting from needing that, from wanting that dynamic?
Mm.
Is that just part of a slow gradual process of learning to love them, or
Well, no, it was a process for me too. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, I
Mm,
relate. And, and there was a time, in fact, where, in some of the elements, some of the, in which, like the program I was originally mentored in as a coach, there are aspects of that were a bit not intentional as authoritarian, right?
mm,
But just because of the dynamics and the way it was set up, it could definitely be interpreted that way, as these tools are the solution to everyone's problem,
yeah,
right?
if you just do this and this.
And yeah, and so I could see why, like I personally, coming out, was still looking for something in that
Yeah,
realm. And then there came a place where I recognized, oh, that's what's happening for me.
yeah.
And and then there was that time, like, well, I don't want to, if I'm going to be perhaps like either working with people one-on-one, but maybe in a group situation, like I don't want to be someone's guru. What would I need to do? How would I have to go about setting that up
Mm,
in order to make it my real focus to empower
mm,
rather than merely teach, right?
yeah.
So, like, this has been super important to me, and I'm still like walking my way through all of those aspects. But what I can tell you is, like, it's always on my mind. I want to create places where other people can talk to each other,
Yeah.
and that I don't have all the answers
Yeah.
for anybody. I don't. I will
Yeah.
not proclaim that I
Oh,
do. I do not
God
speak for
forbid.
God,
I don't want that
right?
stress.
Yes, right? But I do believe that people can figure out, have access to higher wisdom within themselves, and sometimes they do need someone outside them to hold that space, to
Mm,
ask questions, to share options, to help them see the beliefs they may be carrying with them from their background that isn't like the traditional, like, stories of scripture or messages you would hear in a Sunday school class. There are these more subtle beliefs, like I'm broken, right?
mhm.
Or that people need rules, or chaos will ensue,
Yeah.
or yeah, or like I'm a bad person if I say what I want,
Mm,
right? Like that there's internalized beliefs often for people coming out of religion that's selfish. And
yeah.
actually it's not accurate. It's actually the least selfish thing you can do to hone in to your own wants, to be radically honest, to think about what reasons you want to do something, to take care of yourself, because the only other alternative is to manipulate other people so
Yeah.
that your needs are met. And so when you're not doing that, when you're honest about what you want, even in the context of a relationship, you actually give the other person the opportunity to choose.
Mm, yeah.
You let them off the hook. You say, no, I'm not going to manipulate you, right? And you are not responsible to figure out how to meet all my needs and read my mind and my wants. I will share, but this is like, or I might make a request, but you can say no.
Mm,
I can handle it, and it's not your fault. Even if I'm disappointed, I can be disappointed.
yeah.
I can figure out what else I might want to do. how to move forward. I'm an adult. You're an adult, right? I think if I would had to break it down into the one boundary that is the most problematic over and over and over again with like probably everybody that comes out of authoritarian religion, is over responsibility for other people's feelings and not trusting oneself to be able to feel one's own feelings.
Yeah. Well, it's devaluing yourself, right? And it's elevating the group, the community, the whatever it is. It's such it's a very early psychological state, you know, that denying self for the sake of the group. That's you know, in child psychology, that's kind of like, I don't know, is that age 5 through maybe 10? And so when we're looking at, you know, as an adult, to still be somewhat in that psychological state where we're gonna turn down our own desires and wants so that the group feels safe, so that other people are happy,
Right.
so that it's a very
But it's not
concerning
even
thing.
so that. It's your own perception of what they need,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and then
Like
we're
you're
just imagining what they want.
like you're deciding ahead of time that they're going to be disappointed without even giving them information to be disappointed about, deciding what else you need to do so that they aren't. Really, it's a way you are saying in a very subtle way without like often recognizing it, other person, that I don't think you can handle it.
Yeah.
I believe your pain is stronger than you, right? If you are going to have it, it means I'm going to take away the human experience and your opportunity to consider how you want to feel. And really, all of our feelings come from our own brain 100% of the time. Like, if we really want to get scientific about it, Phil, like you cannot actually hurt someone else's feelings. You can say words, but their brain is going to interpret a meaning. They're going to decide if that's good, bad, safe, whatever. Like, you know, you could bring someone flowers and have all the goodness in your heart. And they could think, I love flowers, that's so awesome, and feel happy, right? But they could also think, oh my gosh, you're 5 minutes late. Did you not remember we're supposed to be at this appointment? Right?
You're out running around buying flowers, you idiot. Yeah.
Yes. They could have also heard from several friends, you know, friends who bring you flowers. Like I've had 3 do that. This means they're in multi-level marketing. They're about to come at you. So you show up unannounced without flowers, like, oh crap.
Yeah.
Right? You could have all the goodness in your heart. You do not actually have the power to make them feel one way or the other. And you could do everything you think they want you to do, and they can still feel upset, disappointed, mad, right? Like,
Yeah.
they can. We really know this intellectually. So the moment we get over involved in somebody else's brain and try to control like what they're thinking, how they're feeling, already we are disempowering not only ourselves, but them.
Yeah.
You know, it's not kind.
No, absolutely.
Right? What's kind is to show up and like, you can, like, the goal you can do is like, I want to give my friend flowers. I love this person. I care. This is my sign. However they react to them, whether they love them or not, you can have no regrets knowing your own intention.
Yeah.
That
That's
part
really
is,
good.
that's in your control.
Yeah. We tend to create these little mini worlds and suffer them, don't we? We create a world where I know how Claudine will interpret me giving her flowers. And therefore, because I know she would then get upset, I won't give her the flowers, and then blah, blah. And we created this whole world and we've seen the outcomes and we've decided everything else. And you weren't actually a part of it. You know,
Right.
it's a remarkably selfish thing to do it in a lot of ways as well, actually. Wow. One thing I'm really interested, I'd love to pick your brains on the post-Mormon experience and the trajectory of post-Mormonism generally. A lot of people that are deconstructing, most people I talk with are generally coming out of Christian backgrounds, a handful from Mormon backgrounds. Interestingly, in my experience, most of the people that are coming out of Mormonism that end up talking to me are often quite interested in exploring some form of conventional Christianity,
Mm.
as
Oh,
some sort of
interesting.
stepping stone of like, well, I don't want to give up all kinds of faith or religion. I see a problem with Mormonism. I don't like the way they're handling money, or the system is oppressive, or they're a bit too patriarchal, or whatever the issue is, right? And they go, but maybe
Mhm.
a Christian church that's just a little bit like more kind of
Mm.
open, whatever.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that's a fascinating thing. Now, what's interesting is most of the people that then do, I'm very hands off. I'm like, hey, go to a church, check it out. Oh, I'm not a big fan.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
most of them then end up going, okay, and they keep moving on beyond that into something
Yes.
else. But what's interesting is there seems to be a desire in most people to map out a process and go, oh yeah, okay, so if you go from here to here to here to here,
Mhm.
everyone ultimately will end up here, which happens to almost always be where they are right now, right? Because we're perfect and we figured it out. Um, do you see a kind of trajectory, a path when people kind of go, oh, I'm not sure about this Mormonism, I feel betrayed, I feel I'm not happy with it? Do they go into Eastern religion? Do they go into humanism? Do they,
Mhm.
or can it look very, very varied and quite different?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm thinking, I've seen quite a few different paths.
Hmm.
Um, I can say personally, like for a very short period of time, I did explore other like Christian churches, in part because of that loss of community,
Hmm.
also the loss of structure, something to do on Sunday, right? Like even people to love and serve, to be part
Yeah.
of, to show up. Um, I think some people like do a little bit of exploration, um, either in that world or sometimes through like universal Unitarianism or some kind of like people want that
Yeah.
community
No,
connection,
absolutely.
or at least, yeah. So,
It's not a common thing outside of some sort of
mhm,
religious structure either, is it? That kind of
mhm,
community feel, especially something as tight as Mormonism. You're gonna probably
yeah.
have to find something quite religious to experience such a tight knit community, generally
Mhm.
speaking. Hmm.
I think the majority of people, though, that I know, like, don't end up doing that.
Yeah.
When I really, I don't have stats I can
No,
give
of
you
course.
because
Yeah.
I just went through
We're
all
working
the
on getting
people,
stats, so
uh, you
that's something
know,
I'm hoping
talking
to
to
see.
lots in terms of like, I think most people don't trust religion,
Hmm.
um, or they maybe want to hang on to a certain aspect, but they don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
That maybe they would don't want to like. And I think we have to make a separation here between authoritarian type religion, because there are some, like, if you look at a spectrum, there's like the Richard
Hmm.
Rohr,
Yeah.
they take the Bible and stories, but they hone in on principles, mostly love.
Yeah.
And um, and they're a very different kind of Christian, in my opinion.
Yep. I would agree with that.
This isn't like tell you what to do, obedience and loyalty culture, right? So, like, I think that it's going to depend on people's individual values, what's most important to them.
Hmm.
And I think it's really healthy and useful to talk to lots of people and just kind of hear
Yeah.
what's meaningful to them and why.
Yeah.
And and realize again it's a process. um
Yeah.
There isn't, though, anything exactly like the ready-made community with Mormonism, right?
Yeah.
Like you can only get that. And I've seen this in documentaries of other like cults, right?
Mm. Yeah.
Like, I mean, that like really intense sense of family. And there's ones that even do it more than that. But the more connected that way, it does create this very unique environment that
Mm.
you're probably not going to get in any organization that opts for allowing more difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think a lot of people get value in that Unitarian Universalism type
Yeah.
structure.
Yeah.
It gives the community the values, but you can be atheist, you can be
It's
Christian, you can
very
be
open, isn't
Buddhist,
it?
you can have, yes.
Yeah. Do you think that a lot of people hold on to some level of spirituality and that dynamic? I'm always intrigued by when people come out completely of a religious concept, the difference between people that go hard atheist and go, that's it, I'm done, I don't believe in anything, to a more soft kind of agnostic position of going, well, actually, I still hold to some sort of spiritual realm. Maybe like talking of your parents coming home and your mom coming home and
Yeah.
talking about, crazy, weird
Yeah.
spiritual kind of, this is crazy. I don't know what to do with it. I don't believe in anything. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Buddhist, but that was weird, wasn't it? I'm intrigued as well by how many people we're working really hard to get data on this as part of our research. We do research on deconstructing Christians and different faiths as well. So hopefully we'll get more data on that. But do you think people coming out of Mormonism, it's not just community, but there is some level of spirituality, or do you think people are quite quick to drop that a lot of the time?
Phil, I really think it depends on how you define spirituality. Like what human beings cannot live without is stories.
Yeah.
So I would suggest, like my gut instinct, I don't have stats, but what I can say is every single thing you've suggested here is just a new story, right? Everybody
Yeah.
needs a story for how to deal with things they don't understand. They need a story to define this sense of awe. Like they want to feel this connection to being part of something bigger. We still have to have language like conscience, right? Everything really comes down to words and stories and how you spin it and put it together. Like even the word spirituality, this is a human construct, right?
Yeah.
The word God is a human construct. So, like people in the same religious congregation sitting on the same pew, both may be saying the same word, God, but in their own brains, in their life experience, they are not interpreting it the same. They're just
Yeah.
under the illusion that everybody sitting in that church congregation sees God the same way they do. And it's just not accurate. Religion and church congregations, as they come together, they present these beautiful illusions. And so I don't know how you can are you looking at different people's religious experiences, or are we looking, is this a language survey that you're doing? Right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's one of the problems of this is why I'm working with a research company. Because
Yeah,
it is complex dealing with these kind of
it is.
topics, and especially when you're working with very clear or I should say very clearly self-identified definitions and categories. Even
Yeah.
what is a deconstructed faith? I mean, well, like you put 300 people in a room having all deconstructed their faith, and they'll all be different and have different experiences, done it for
Yes.
different reasons, different ways, to different ends. It's a very fascinating thing. It just shows how unique it is though to people, and the stories that we do tell ourselves, the myths that we create to frame and give meaning can be so unique. It's very, very
We
interesting.
cannot live without stories.
Yeah.
So I think it is one of the most I don't know, unsettling, maybe is the word I'm looking for. One of the most unsettling losses of leaving religion, because you lose like your sense and connection to the stories, at least in the way you related to them before, at minimum.
Yeah.
So, reconstruction, that process in part is really the process of building new stories about how you're going to see yourself, how you're going to see your life, how you're going to see your relationships, how you're going to see the world.
Yeah.
Like we cannot live without stories.
Yeah.
We must have them. And so this is the seeking we all do, and we don't feel settled until at least we get a story that helps us move towards other stories.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. As someone who is still figuring out what the heck stories I'm piecing together and how I fit in this story, that's it. It's a beautiful way to To sum it up, really, it's the story doesn't work anymore. The story isn't true, and well, what parts were true, and how do I fit in that, and what do I need to add, and do I need to explore other stories and find ways to kind of create a bigger overarching story that I can fit into and give myself meaning and purpose and identity. And yeah, it's a painful, exciting, terrifying, fun journey.
Even our story of truth.
Mm.
Right? This is getting down to the more basic thing. Like, and this is part of what I share with people, some of the processes we work through in coaching is really get down to like the bare bones facts. And when I say we're getting to a fact, this is like, okay, this has to be one that both Republicans and Democrats, believers and non-believers, right?
Yeah.
People in every country of the world, if we looked at this, everyone would say, yes, in fact, that is like, there is a tree in my front yard. Okay. Like I am a 51-year-old woman. Okay. These are the kinds of things. Okay. Probably most of us humans, we're not going to get really like that we could call that a fact, a truth.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
What that means, the moment though we say that statement, our subconscious brain kicks in and makes an interpretation.
Yeah.
Was that good or bad? Do I like, what do I think about 51-year-olds being a 51-year-old, right? My brain is like already, and that like, we don't perceive all that's happening in the background. And it's really useful sometime to, go and look, okay, well, what actually is the fact? And then what is our perception of that? And what else is coming up? And let's look at that from a variety of, and do we want to maintain that belief? Do we want to consider a slightly different story to tell about that? And those are those moments. That's how we get past like the ideas of like, I am selfish, right? For wanting, or I can't tell my spouse that I'm, I don't want to be part of the church anymore. Well, why do you think that? Well, let's figure out what are the underlying stories? What are those assumptions? And, my background, actually, it's my master's degree is in English with an emphasis of composition and rhetoric. So what is really fascinating is how useful that is. Because really we're looking at underlying assumptions. What religions do is like, they're amazing advertisers. It's not just what they say that gets stored in our subconscious brain. It's these very subtle messages that are implied. Yeah. And this is why sometimes you get people going, well, the church doesn't actually teach that. Well, actually, yes, they do. But it would take me an hour to walk you through how this message has this right? These underlying assumptions. We have to dig in to see actually where are you picking this, like that message is coming through loud and clear. Your subconscious brain is fast and it's got it. So given that, what if you could feed your brain or open up, like this is, again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but what if we can open up to the possibility we could consider believing or thinking about this in a very new way that could change everything. And once you start shifting some of these more central beliefs and have somebody help you see actually what's the result of believing that my want or my communicating this is selfish, right? Once you believe that, well, how does that make you feel? And then how do you show up? And then what kind of spouse are you showing up as? And how is this impacting? What's the result for you in your life? Yeah. And as you start looking at all that, that's a way to actually evaluate your beliefs. That's more practical than like just, well, I should and I shouldn't and I have to and I must, right? Those are red flag words in your thought patterns every time. Yeah.
It's a big jump to step out of living in that duality though, this right, wrong, left, right, good, bad, black, white, especially when you've been living in a structured authoritarian religion, half our culture that doesn't do that still is very dualistic, you just have to look at American culture as a whole, right? It is, are you red or blue, Republican or Democrat, right? We've got our yes, no, black, white, right? And everyone will disagree about which side is right or wrong, but we all
Yes.
agree that my side is right and you are wrong. And
Yes.
so, even outside of religion, we can be so deeply dualistic. We're so ingrained in what's right and what's wrong and what we think is for the best and for the worst. And it's a really, and it's, at the same time, it's probably one of the most important journeys to go on, is the development
Right.
of a
Yeah.
healthy
Yes.
human, with good mental health, and maybe telling good stories about our
Yeah.
world and finding ourselves in something healthy. It's really huge. I like that a lot. When you were saying that, I was just thinking of, I don't know if you're familiar with the comedian, Ricky Gervais. He does all sorts of
Mhm.
TV shows, movies. He's British, but he tells it this way, because he's an atheist, and basically someone was saying to him, like, well, how do you know religion's wrong? And he says, well, let me put it this way. He says, you find me a religion, okay? And he says, and let me destroy every single thing that talks about that religion or has recorded that religion, and then we'll fast forward 2,000 years, and if that religion is true, we'd have the same book. Someone would come up with a Bible. Someone would come up with Jesus,
Mhm.
and he says,
Mhm.
and the funny thing is about most religions is that's never going to happen with any of them. He's like, now we
Right.
could come up with some new stories that talk about similar themes that are true. He's like, yeah, there's
Mhm.
loads in religion that's true, but the story around it that we are exploring is going to ebb and flow with our culture, with who we are, with how with our own neuroses or whatever else. And I think that's the thing that I think, to me, as you're saying that I'm thinking of, like, how do I explore that in myself? How do I question that? It's the thing of, if I took myself out of my life and my culture, my upbringing, whatever, would I end
Mhm.
up with the same idea that I'm worthless? Would I end up with the same
Mhm.
concept of this? And actually, maybe some of the things I would hold, maybe I would hold to some things like, oh, it's a good thing to love people, it's a bad thing to kill people. I don't know, maybe some of those will kind of hold as fairly timeless. Who knows? I know you can find some cultures where they don't have a problem with killing certain people in certain contexts, right? So maybe not.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, well, it's tribally constructed in many ways,
exactly.
right?
Right.
Right now, we are tribal. I mean, humans are tribal beings until very recently.
Mm,
We didn't have the ability, to fly around the world,
yeah.
to communicate like you and I are right now.
Yeah.
100 years ago, we would have never been able to have this conversation.
No, one of us probably would have
So,
died in the journey making it happen.
part of what I believe is actually happening right now, that's very like unsettling to so many of us, is the tribes are being disrupted,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
Our old tribes, like the way we were built, our ancestors were set up, is like the people that were geographically close to us were our tribe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it did make sense to stay connected and to cooperate with them and to be able to fight off,
Yeah.
saber-toothed tigers that may come after the tribe, and to work together to do this. It did help us survive.
Yeah.
So, as tribal beings, we actually care more about belonging than we
Hmm.
do evidence. We
Yeah.
think we like look at evidence, but actually it's our tribal messages and stories that filter the very evidence we're willing
Mm,
to seriously consider. So,
yeah.
like, that whole, like, every time you come back to truth, I think, well, I think I prefer to use the language it works or it doesn't, it serves us,
Mm,
it's
yeah.
useful. Like, what are we actually trying to accomplish? Because if it's not a fact, it's a story. If we
Hmm.
don't all agree on it, or the
Yeah.
moment we add good or bad, right or wrong, right, then it's a story.
Yeah.
Meaning, there's always another optional way to describe the thing, to think about the thing.
Yeah.
And that I just don't know that I believe anymore these terms, right and wrong as point blank,
Hmm.
are helping us to have the conversations that we need
Yeah.
to actually achieve the goals, or to create the systems, the laws, whatever it is, that will actually, like, that more of us actually do agree on, but we can't see it because we're so caught in our tribes. right? Like we
Yeah.
have to choose pro-life or pro-choice. Well, most pro-life people aren't as pro-life as it might sound.
Hmm.
No, most of them aren't anti-birth control. There are some. Most of them, though, would, if there was a 10-year-old raped by her older brother and she was pregnant, most of those people would not oppose the morning after pill. They
Hmm.
would go, well, in that circumstance, maybe, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah.
there is a spectrum. Most pro choice people don't think that somebody should just be able to abort their 8-month-old fetus for just any reason because they've changed their mind, right?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
and with any method whatsoever.
Yeah.
So, like, the fact that there are these two camps is problematic
Yeah.
because there may be a lot more things like that if we're trying to work together and accomplish some things, honing in on the things that, like, well, actually, like, let's work towards some of this that we could get done instead of you're the enemy because you don't
Mm.
see everything I do. The moment we do that, we're like shutting down our creative powers.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So
Claudine,
anyway, yeah.
I have loved this chat. We're rapidly running out of time, which devastates me on many levels. But I have absolutely loved chatting with you. How can people who have enjoyed this want to connect with you, want to follow what you're doing? What are some of the best ways to do that? And I'll make sure they're in the show notes and people can do that.
Yeah. So you can follow me on Facebook or Instagram,
Okay.
Post Mormon Mental Health. Or I have a website, postmormonmentalhealth.com.
Okay.
Those are the easiest ways. You can
Awesome.
email me also, Claudine at Post Mormon Mental Health.
Perfect. Wonderful. I will make sure
So,
they're there. People listening, if you enjoyed that, do get in touch with Claudine. Let her know that
yeah,
you loved it. Definitely. I mean, of those options, I've flicked through your website, but I've probably spent most time on your Instagram, and I love the stuff you're
yes.
posting. I love the
Thank
stuff you're
you.
posting on your stories and on your profile. Just really interesting, helpful, insightful stuff. And I do think that I think we both agree on this, that the crossover in our worlds is
Mhm.
very big. And so if you have come out of a Christian world and you think, well, it's Mormonism, hopefully after listening to this for a couple of hours almost, you've kind of gone, oh, actually, there's probably a lot I can learn here and a lot I can take away.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah, we
thank you
are
so
on the
much.
same human journey, I think. And Phil,
Absolutely.
likewise, I just want to say I honor what you're doing. I love that you're looking at research, that you're interviewing people. I think these conversations are so important. And
Absolutely.
that we all who have come out of religion, we need to know we're not alone.
Yeah.
And that there are people who understand the process and that we can move forward.
Absolutely.
It can and it does keep getting better from those, original months,
Yeah.
as
No,
we're reaching
it
those
certainly does. It
tough
certainly
decisions.
does. I've
Yes.
seen enough people
Hmm.
moving in that trajectory that I know that, well, if you're not there already, you will be. You will get there. You hang in there. But yeah, no,
Yes.
thank you so much. Thank you for what you're doing. It's really helpful. It's really important. I'm enjoying it a lot anyway. But yeah, we'll chat soon and catch up, and I'll let you know when this all comes out as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right. Have a good day. Yeah.
Thanks. You
All
too.
right. Bye.
Bye.